Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tori Story. Today, we're talking about the third eye with Dr. Julien Benoit. He currently works at the Evolutionary Studies Institute at the University of Witwatersrand as a lead researcher. So, Julian does research in paleobiology, neuroscience, and evolutionary biology. And his current project is pre-mammalian evolution from the central nervous system and sensory organs in Therapsida using computed tomography. So welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me, Julian. I really appreciate it.
Hi. Thank you
Hi.
for welcoming me in your show.
It's an absolute pleasure. So let's begin with where are you from and how did you come to be a researcher in South Africa? Why South Africa?
So my name is Julian. I'm from France, in case you didn't hear. I have that very strong French accent. I apologize in advance for that.
That's
So
okay.
I studied in Montpellier, south of France, where I did my master's and PhD in paleontology. And then I moved to South Africa in 2014 to become first what we call a postdoc, which is literally,
Right.
it literally means after your doctorate. So
Yeah.
it's a short-term contract, a short-term researcher contract. And one short-term contract after another, I became, there's finally a position that opened at the University of the Witwatersrand, and I became a senior researcher there in 2016. And
Fantastic.
yeah, the reason I came to South Africa originally, so because I completed my PhD on African mammals, originally African mammals and their neurology and their biology. Particularly, I was studying the inner ear and the brain. So the inner ear, that's the organ of hearing, of course, but it's also the organ of balance. And the
Yeah.
brain was also one of my center of interest. And South Africa is very lucky to have the Karoo, which is a gigantic surface area of rocks that document very nicely and very precisely the origin of mammals. So that was of huge interest
Amazing.
for my research and a privilege to start a postdoc in South Africa. And I'm still the happiest paleontologist in the world working on those wonderful fossils.
Yeah, fantastic. It's so fascinating. And yes, it is really world famous. I think it was the Sterkfontein caves, if I'm not mistaken, that has recently uncovered a large fossil record of Homo naledi, which is one of the hominid species. I think it was like, I can't remember the exact amount of years ago. But yes, it is incredibly fossil rich part of the earth. Okay, so, and today what we're specifically talking about is the pineal gland, which a lot of people might know as the third eye. And so, and I think perhaps the only thing I knew about it really is in sort of esoteric terms. I think a lot of people and some religions equate it with being linked to some kind of wisdom or higher consciousness. But in this particular show, we're not talking about that. We're speaking about how it works, what is the purpose of it, and the role that it played in the transition of reptiles to mammals, which is really fascinating. So if you can give us the scientific explanation for what exactly does the pineal eye do, and if you can tell us the role that it played in the transition from reptile to mammal.
Yeah, so that's going to be quite a long story, but
That's
yes,
okay. That's okay.
let's start first with what we have today. What is a third eye today? So there are a few species. There's actually a lot of species today that possess a third eye. These are
Right.
mostly reptiles, so species that are cold-blooded. And these include, for example, you probably know the iguanas and the
Yeah.
leguan, so all the monitor lizards, for example. That includes the Komodo dragon, for example.
Wow.
These reptiles all have a pineal eye. So it
Mm.
is located in a hole on top of their skull. So yeah, this is a skull here. You have the eye
I see.
socket. That's the nostril. So you see there's a hole at the top of the skull here, and that's
Hmm.
the hole that accommodates, that houses the third eye. And it is an eye. When you look at modern reptiles, when you dissect modern reptiles, you see that it is an eye in its own right. So it has a nerve, just like your that goes from the brain all the way to the eye, like your regular eyes, and it has a retina and it has a lens on top of it, and it's capable of seeing things, like it sees, and it doesn't see
Wow.
very nicely, to be honest. Uh,
Hmm.
and in most reptiles, what it sees is just the difference between the day and the light and the night. So
Interesting.
and that's an important part. It constitutes an important part of their biology because it's basically a receptor that tells the brain, okay, now it's the day, now it's the night. So it
Hmm.
tells them when to sleep and when to go basking. And it also tells them when it's the summer and when it's the winter, because it also sees the difference in the length of the days and of the nights. Uh,
Wow.
that's actually
That's
quite interesting.
incredible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not bad. It's
Interesting.
not bad.
Very. So it kind of functions like a calendar of sorts. So it's like a biological clock.
Exactly. This is exactly what it does. Yeah, it's a
Wow.
biological clock, and it's connected to all the functions of the brain that are linked with biological cycles. So typically sleep and reproduction. And another
Wow.
one, which will be of interest for us when we talk about the evolution of the third eye, it's the thermoregulation, so regulation of body
Thermoregulation.
temperature. It tells the brain of cold-blooded species when you should go basking, and
Wow.
that's an important part of their biology. And experiments, quite cruel experiment, cruel with not cool, cruel
Cruel.
experiments have been
Cruel.
done.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
I have to account for the fact that I pronounce very badly that word, but yeah, quite cruel
No problem.
experiments have been done with some reptiles in the past, like in the 50s and 60s, and they removed that pineal,
Oh.
that third eye, which we
Oh.
sometimes call the pineal eye, from
Right.
some reptiles, and they could see that all of these functions were lost, and particularly they could not regulate their body temperature because they did not understand when to go basking and when to get away from the light. So
Gosh. That's
yeah,
sad. But well, I suppose now we know how it works. Um,
we don't have to
gosh,
do it again. Exactly.
at least it's not going to be done again, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, um, that's so fascinating. And where in the fossil record do we see? I mean, so from what I understand, humans are descended from reptiles. Well, we have evolved, right? Mammals evolved from reptiles. Am I right? Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Well,
where?
in some sort, mammals are a weird kind of reptiles. So you know, if you oversimplify the evolution, we started as fish, transitioned into amphibians, transitioned into reptiles, transitioned into mammals, then monkeys, then apes, then humans. So that's the oversimplified story, and so that implies that yeah, at some point some reptiles turned into weird reptiles with fur that don't lay eggs anymore, basically.
Oh wow.
And
Okay.
we call that mammals.
So mammals. How much of mammals are reptilian, and how much is mammal, or are we underneath it all just very weird looking lizards?
Um, let's say, well, we share a fair amount of our biology with other reptiles. For example, if you look at the platypus, the echidna, they lay eggs. And when you
Yeah,
look at
yeah.
how we as humans reproduce, we do make eggs, except we don't lay them. We
Yeah,
just keep them inside the body, and that's where so there's no shell, but it's just the egg
that's
is retained inside the body and grows inside the body until the baby is ready to come out. So we share a fair amount of our biology with reptiles. We Just like reptiles, our skin is dry, for example. We've got eyelids to moisten our eyes, and
right.
our sensory organs are adapted to live on land. So we can hear airborne sound, we can smell, we can what else? We can taste things that are out of water. Well, we can
Right.
actually we cannot really, because our tongue is always moist. You see, so we
Yeah.
have that kind of weird. We have all those kinds of weird adaptation that
Wow.
enable us to do things that our fish ancestors used to do in water, but we do it in the open. We
Yeah.
do it on land, but that involves also creating all those liquids. Like in our eyes, we create a liquid that mimics salt water. In our mouth,
Wow.
to be able to taste, we mimic a liquid that also imitate a watery environment. So, and same thing when you look at the inner ear. The inner ear, it's a capsule that also contains a liquid. So we have all those weird
Wow.
adaptations, and all of these weird adaptations to life on land are shared
Yeah.
with a reptile. And of course, I almost forgot the kidneys. Our
Yes.
kidneys,
Wow.
we purify our blood our, through kidneys, which fish don't do,
Wow.
for example. So yeah, that's all
Wow.
those adaptations that we share with reptile. And so on top of that reptilian body plan, what mammals did is just adding fur and adding a few weird way of reproducing, which for some mammals at least involve not laying eggs anymore.
That is so fascinating. I mean, I remember studying, well, way back in my undergrad when we did a brief sort of overview of evolution. And I understand that evolution takes millions of years. It's not a sudden thing, it's not a quick thing. But if you could explain a bit about how did this transition happen from having an external pineal eye and it becoming in humans adapted that we lost the third eye and we became, what do we have now? We have the pineal gland, which we sometimes refer to as the third eye. And how did this happen? And can you explain the trajectory from having a third eye to mammals not losing the third eye?
Okay. Yeah, so a third eye. We are not completely sure when the third eye first appeared. It was probably in fish, like in the fish time of our evolution,
Okay.
and um, and so it and we don't really know what it was used for. Probably also for biological cycles of some sort. But we know
Right.
that all reptiles, when we got to the reptile point of our evolution, all the reptiles,
Okay.
including mammalian ancestors, had a third eye. So they all had a pineal eye
Wow.
connected to the pineal gland. So, and the pineal eye telling the pineal gland, go to sleep, go reproduce, go basking. Um,
Wow.
so that's the base ground of our evolution, and that was about 400 to 300 million years ago.
Wow.
And we know from the South African fossil record that these reptiles then started gradually evolving into mammals. It was a very long process. It took more than 100 million years probably 150 million years. And what's amazing about the South African fossil record, the Karoo,
Yeah.
is that we have a continuous record of this transition from the most reptilian looking animals, sprawling with a long tail, scaly animals, all the way to the most mammalian looking animals, generally very small, shrew-like, with hairs, um, with a
Wow.
short tail, with whiskers, like something that you would call a mammal if you see it. So we have all that transition that's beautifully preserved. It's absolutely perfect. And in
Amazing.
that transition, we see exactly when the pineal eye first kind of became obsolete and then disappears completely. And we think this transition is linked to one of the fundamental change in our ancestors' physiology, which is the time when they turned from cold-blooded, so
Yeah.
reptilian-like in their physiology or in their metabolism, the time when they turn from cold-blooded to warm-blooded. So warm-blooded being elevated metabolism. So a metabolism where your body keeps warm all the time by itself. Um, there are a few advantages to both conditions. So it's not because in our case the cold-blooded condition is primitive and the warm-blooded condition is derived that that the cold-blooded condition cannot have advantages on its own. For example, if you look at tortoise, the tortoise live very long and they don't need a lot of food because they are
Oh.
cold-blooded. On the other hand, we mammals are relatively short-lived and we use a lot of energy, and so we have to eat a lot. Like
Yeah.
crocodiles, you've probably been amazed by people telling you, yeah, that crocodile hasn't eaten for 6 months. And
What?
you don't understand. And you don't understand why, because you're a mammal and you're like, I have to eat 3 times a day. How does he do?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's
That's
not because it's cold-blooded. Cold-blooded
wow.
saves energy, and so if you have a long period of little food, it doesn't matter if you are cold-blooded. So there are advantages to both of them. So I just don't want to convey the idea that cold-blooded is just disadvantageous compared to warm-blooded. It's just warm-blooded was
Yeah.
advantageous at a point in our evolution, and so
Yeah.
that became the condition in mammals. Um, so yeah, so that event happened, and we think it's correlated to the loss of the pineal eye,
Yeah.
because as I explained, in modern reptiles, what we see is that when you remove the pineal eye, you also remove the ability of going to bask. Uh,
Right.
on the other hand, we know, there are other functions to the pineal eye. We said it has a function in reproduction and in sleep, so
Right.
sleep cycles and reproduction cycles. But these two were not lost during our
Yeah.
evolution. We still reproduce, we still sleep,
Yeah.
and we do that
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
There
Yes.
are 8 billion of human beings that demonstrate that we still reproduce very well. So what
Yeah.
has been lost that justifies the loss of the pineal eye is probably the fact that our ancestors used to be cold-blooded and they turned into warm-blooded. And so they did not need to bask anymore. So they did not need to make that decision.
Right.
Their brain did not need to make that decision. And so
Wow.
the pineal eye became obsolete. And thanks to
Very
that
interesting.
wonderful fossil record that we have here in South Africa,
Yeah.
we can pinpoint exactly the major events. So
Yeah.
firstly, it became you can see that the animals that always had a third eye, so you see animals that have that kind of hole on top of
Yeah.
their skull,
Uh-huh.
we see that hole becomes quite inconsistent. Like sometimes it's there and sometimes it's not. So we call
I
that
see.
variable. So the
Okay.
presence of the hole becomes variable. Sometimes around 255 million years ago.
Yeah.
So that's the first step. Like, so you don't need to have a third eye anymore to survive. So you can have it or not, it doesn't change much. And that's the
I
first step
see.
that indicates that the third eye became sort of redundant,
I see.
obsolete. And then you have the definite loss of that foramen, so the definite loss of that hole. That
Uh-huh.
hole completely disappears in mammalian ancestors 200 and 240, 45, well, 240 million years ago. So
Okay.
a little bit closer to us. Before the first mammals evolved, we are still in mammalian ancestors, but not yet in mammals, in proper
Uh-huh.
mammals. So that hole disappears completely, and then we are sure, okay, this time they don't need a pineal eye anymore, and that's probably when they were fully, completely warm-blooded. So,
Interesting. Wow.
so yeah, we can follow that transition very, 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 very nicely.
Mm.
And another thing that's interesting about the pineal eye and that transition from cold-blooded to warm-blooded is
Mm.
that experiments over cruel experiments that were done on mice this time, so on mammals,
Poor
show
thing.
that yeah, when you mutate a gene called MSX2, so there's a gene
Uh-huh.
called MSX2. When you mutate that gene in mice, so modern mice are mammals, they don't have a pineal eye. They don't have a pineal eye, they just have a gland, but it's very small like us.
Yeah.
But if you mutate that gene, you recreate the hole, that hole here.
Wow.
So you recreate a pineal opening in the skull. You don't recreate the eye, but you recreate the opening in the skull.
Wow.
And what's interesting is when you do that, there are side effects. And the side
Wow.
effects are that the mice don't have hair and they don't have mammary glands. So
Wow.
you basically de-evolved them into reptiles.
Oh my goodness. That
And
is
that's
absolutely fascinating.
yeah,
Wow.
it's like the mammalness switch button. You can turn it on and off in a modern mammal, and it recreates what we think our mammalian ancestors looked like 200 before 240 million years ago.
Yeah. So if we can uh change this, if we can flip this switch um manually, I guess, what does it in the environment? What in the environment changes the genetics of an animal to show different features like that? Is that what happens naturally? That gene gets switched on and off, or how exactly do these features suddenly come about because they're needed, or lost because they're not needed?
So a natural mutant of that of MSX2 would not would probably not survive. Like if a mouse or any sort of animal has that kind of mutation, it probably will not survive. It's just
Yeah.
in lab condition we can maintain an animal
Yeah.
alive even with that because it's a terrible mutation. I mean, it
Right.
has like these are huge consequences for
Yeah.
just one mutation. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, a wild animal would not survive that, and so the uh, today, I mean,
Yeah.
and there are a few people who express that mutation, and what's interesting is that they actually have a hole in their skull,
Oh my.
and which shows you where your third eye would be if you had a third eye. And the funny thing is that it's not here, like the popular belief. It's all the way there. I don't know if you can see.
Whoa.
So it would
That
be at the
is,
back of your head
oh
because
my
the well,
gosh.
human head is weird. A human head is very very weird.
So
Uh,
weird.
the, the pineal, the natural position of the third eye is between the two bones called the parietal, and in humans the parietals are not there like in other mammals. They are all the way back there. So
Wow.
that's why your third eye would be at the back of your skull, not here. These are your
How bizarre.
yeah, these are your frontal bones,
It's
not your
just, it's like
parietals.
something out of a horror movie.
Yeah. So yeah, today an animal would not survive that mutation without lab or intensive care condition. Well, not
Right.
intensive care, but a lot of shelter. um,
Right.
and and it's probably because it's a mutation also. The original mutation that probably happened 240 million years ago uh, probably worked slightly differently, and it was in a completely different environment. 240 million years ago, we are in a time called the Triassic, and in the Triassic, you're just in the aftermath of the largest mass extinction that ever happened to life.
Right.
90% of everything that was alive died 252 million years ago.
Gosh.
So here you're less than 10 million years after that. So you're in a highly disturbed environment,
Mm.
uh, super hot conditions, particularly in South Africa,
Wow.
uh,
Oh,
where you
I
where you
see.
find mummified, like mummies, mummified animals that then got fossilized. So you've got
Wow.
fossils with skin, like dried skin preserved on them.
Wow.
So yeah, highly,
Perfectly
if,
preserved.
yeah, yeah. So the
Gosh.
environment was very, very different. Stuff to imagine. Very hot in the summer, very, very cold in winters.
Right.
And
So when when it became, well, when and why did it become more advantageous to have mammalian features? So mammals nurse their young and they have fur and they don't need a pineal eye. What brought this about? What were the environmental factors?
so it was probably quite incremental, particularly when you look. So first, the main change that's associated with the pineal eye is warm-bloodedness. So the
Mhm.
fact to have warm blood,
Right.
and for two reasons. First, because as we've seen in reptiles, there is a correlation between your body temperature, the how you regulate your body temperature, and the presence or absence of that pineal eye. And because of the MSX2 mutation, we also know that there is a correlation between the presence of fur and the presence of a pineal eye in mammals. That works in it works in mammals at least.
I see.
So warm-bloodedness was probably the key that connects the pineal eye to the changes with the environment. So when you are warm-blooded, you are you are so you need more food, but you also have more stamina. That's one of the main advantages to be
Oh,
warm-blooded. So
I
you can
see.
hunt for longer periods, and we know that it coincided with also a shrinking in size of our ancestors. So they were not only becoming warm-blooded, they were also becoming smaller, and they were becoming nocturnal. Because after the
Oh,
mass extinction begins the age of dinosaurs. Dinosaurs will
right.
are on the way to become the dominant animals on Earth.
Yes.
So you have all those changes that happen more or less at the same time, and mammalian ancestors reacting to all that by becoming smaller and smaller, making themselves smaller and smaller and more nocturnal. So basically avoiding competition with
I
dinosaurs.
see. Interesting. Wow.
And so
Makes sense.
the more difficult it is to keep your body warm. So,
Yeah.
so, and it's even more difficult if you are nocturnal, because if you are nocturnal, you cannot just go in the sun and warm up.
Right.
So, for these two reasons, uh, warm-bloodedness was advantageous. So, it
Hmm.
helped our
I
ancestors
see.
to hide away from dinosaurs, basically. Um, and also, in a very hot environment, you can imagine the advantages of being nocturnal.
Of course. Oh,
So
wow.
that's
Yeah.
another component of what may explain why this all happened. More recently, we also found that there was a change in the viscosity of that liquid that we have in our ear that
I see.
happened more or less at the same time. So some
Okay.
230, 235 million years ago, so close to the 240 million years ago I was talking about, there was a change in the viscosity of our inner ear. And that change in viscosity happened, well, is indicative of a change in temperature. You know, it's just like butter. If it's hot, it's liquid, it's more liquid. And if it's
Right.
cold, it's more solid. So same
Yes.
thing for your body fluids. They have the same, they obey the same laws of physics. And so we were
Hmm.
able to track that again in the fossil record. And it happened some 233, 35 million years ago during a big climatic change called the pluvial event of the Carnian. So the climate suddenly changed from very warm, very hot, very dry into very rainy, very wet. And
Wow.
one thing that life finds extremely challenging is not the dry environment, is sudden changes between very different environments. So that
Wow.
switch between very dry, very hot to very wet and probably a bit colder was also an important factor in the evolution of endothermy. We don't know yet why, because it's a very recent discovery. It was
Yeah.
really made 2 years ago, and we are still kind of working at making sense of all of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, like lots and lots of things happened at that time. It was a uh, highly changing environment,
Mhm.
and all those changes required flexible. They require flexibility in our ancestors' behavior, and that flexibility goes along better with warm-blooded, apparently warm-blooded metabolism than cold-blooded metabolism. Also, it
That's
seems.
yeah, that makes sense. Um, so does the human eye, well, the two human eyes, um, since we lost the third eye, how does the pineal gland function? Does it function kind of it assists with not thermoregulation, but with sleep cycles, right? With the day and night cycles. It produces melatonin. So what functions did the eyes take over from the third eye when we lost the third eye?
So yeah, when we lost the third eye, uh, there were a few functions of the pineal eye that had to be compensated. So sleep and bio and all the reproduction cycles, and
Yeah.
this was compensated by our regular eyes. So in our regular eyes, we have a special type of cells that are specifically dedicated at doing exactly what the third eye used to do. So these cells are directly communicating with your pineal gland and to secrete all the things that it needs to secrete, like melatonin, for example. So, so yes, there's the
I see.
our paired eyes just basically took over the third eye for those functions. So when,
Yeah.
yeah, this really made the third eye completely redundant.
Okay, well, that is so interesting, and that pretty much brings us to the end of the explanation of the third eye, and I think that was absolutely fascinating. So we're just going to round off our interview with a couple of questions. So first of all, I would like to know, and I think people would like to know, what work of literary fiction or which movie has had the biggest impact on your life?
I'm a big fan of James Bond, which is
That's so interesting. Why James Bond?
why not?
Did that in any way sort of, I guess, you do like traveling? I mean, you're all the way in South Africa from France. How did it influence you, and why did it make such an impact on you?
It's difficult to tell actually. I can't really. trace that so nicely, but no,
It's just a great movie. It's
it's
fine.
just weird.
Also, I
It's
love
weird
James
for my
Bond as well.
generation. It's weird for my generation. Like usually James Bond fans, they were teenagers in the 70s. I was a teenager in the 90s, so
Same. Yeah. Yeah.
so it's weird for our generation. But I think I think it's because of a video game. There was a very popular video game when I was young.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, GoldenEye on Nintendo 64,
Oh, wow.
and that's where it
That's so
came from,
cool.
I think. And
That's
yeah,
so
it's
cool.
just
It's
and
still
it
it's such a
started.
classic spy movie. I mean, there's just I feel like no other movies really compared to the original. Like James Bond is like amazing. I watched I think it was Mission Impossible and I was like, it's not exactly James Bond. Okay, cool. Next question. Okay, so this is a little game of would you rather. Would you rather be a lizard or a snake, and why?
My first intention would be to make a joke about it, but it works only in French. So
Okay.
there's a very popular show in French where one of the most famous joke. It's kind of the equivalent of Blackadder, if you know that show
Yeah, I know Blackadder. Yeah,
that
the
English
British
show.
show.
No, so we
So
have a
good.
French equivalent of that, more or
Yeah.
less. And one of the joke is I hate birds because they don't have arms. And
Ah,
so I would say I would rather be a lizard because they don't have arms.
that makes sense.
Because snakes
Okay.
don't have arms.
I see.
But
I see. Oh, that makes sense. That makes total sense. I think life is a little harder when you have to slither around in your belly as opposed to having arms.
yeah, also snakes don't have a third eye, so that's not funny.
That's just not fair. I mean, a snake should have a third eye. It goes with the whole snake thing. It's like totally badass.
Well, it's one of
Okay.
those weird things in evolution. Like, so snakes
Yeah.
are cold-blooded, but they don't have a third eye. There's also the
Yeah.
crocodiles.
Why?
Crocodiles are cold-blooded and don't have a third eye. Turtles. I have a turtle
Yeah.
skull here, and you see
So that's
that's the
weird. Are
turtle
they
skull.
still able to, how do they regulate their body temperature?
So apparently, the top of the skull is very thin, so that they can still see through the bone. Well, their pineal organ,
Oh,
it's not a gland, it's an organ that
I
also still
see.
retains some photoreceptor function, and so they can see through the skull, apparently, through the bone. Yeah, apparently, so crocodiles apparently were warm-blooded at some point in their evolution.
Yeah.
So early in their evolution, they were warm-blooded, and they still keep today some of those adaptations to warm-bloodedness. For example, their heart is not divided in two; it's divided in four chambers, like
Wow.
like mammals and birds.
Okay.
So that's an adaptation for warm-bloodedness that they still retain despite the fact that they went back to cold-blooded. So that's probably why they don't have a third eye. And for snakes and turtles, it's not sure, but apparently they started their evolution by being burrowing animals. And so when you live underground, your third eye is useless.
I see.
So they lost
That's,
the third eye as they were burrowing animals, but then when they re-emerged as terrestrial animals, terrestrial and for snakes and turtles, aquatic animals also,
yeah.
then well the hole in the skull was already lost. So
Wow. It's interesting. So you say they went from being reptiles to mammals, sorry, cold blooded to warm blooded, and then back to cold blooded.
for crocodiles, yes,
Yeah.
crocodiles, not turtles and snakes, as far as we know, were always cold-blooded.
Okay.
But for crocodiles, yeah, apparently they shifted between cold and warm-blooded, and it's probably even more complicated than that. I don't want to go too far in the details, but they apparently ping-ponged a lot between warm and cold-blooded.
Yeah.
But this is really new. Like, if you would have asked me 10, 15 years ago, I would have told you, no, no, they were cold-blooded. Don't worry.
Yeah.
But it's very new actually. It's something that's being more and more it's becoming more and more documented, and the evidence now I think are strong enough to be quite affirmative. But yeah, apparently, yeah, there are more flexibility between warm and cold-blooded than mammals do.
Fascinating. Gosh. Um, okay, and so just for those who want to study in your field, what exactly does it take? How long does it take to become a paleontologist, and how? What kinds of people should study? What kinds of young people should study paleontology? How do you know you should be a paleontologist?
Well, the I would say it's the passion. Like if you have that passion for the fossils, for heritage, for science, biology, even geology, that's really what it takes, and that's probably the only thing that it actually takes. It's patience. Uh,
Yeah.
you need to have that fire that pushes you all the way through your studies, because
Mm-hmm.
it takes a long time. You need a BSc first,
Mm-hmm.
and then you register for honors with us at the University of the Witwatersrand. So
Mm-hmm.
our institution is as far as I know, it's the only one in sub-Saharan Africa that delivers a degree on which you have paleontology that is written.
Yeah.
So you can become a paleontologist with a geology degree or with a zoology degree, but it's kind of a
A
long,
detour.
yeah, it's kind of a detour, exactly. It's the long way to paleontology. The shortest way to paleontology uh, is with our university on the Africa, at least on the sub-Saharan part of the African continent.
Right.
And yeah, so you get to honors where you get your first degree in paleontology, then you get to masters with us and
Yeah.
to PhD, and that should take you 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years after your matric.
Wow. So
Before,
it's a 9 year course, basically, the whole thing to become a paleontologist.
yes, yes.
Hmm.
Although you get a salary in PhD. Well, usually we work together with the students to get bursaries all along the way, so
Yeah.
you don't starve.
Yeah.
And when you reach the PhD point, where you are a PhD student, usually you have quite a decent salary. So that's not just it's not just you registering, paying for registration, and then having to save for the next year.
Yeah.
So and we've got funding. South Africa is very lucky to have lots of funding opportunities for paleontologists. And that's another thing that's
Okay.
different from most other countries.
Hmm.
South Africa deeply cares about its paleontological heritage. So
Wow.
we've got funding opportunities compared to the general amount of money that the government can provide to academia.
Yeah.
There is a lot of that money that goes to paleontology, like in
Wow.
proportion. Of course, if you look just at the figures, it's less than in North America, for example. But when you look at the proportion that's dedicated to paleontology, it's huge. So
Wow.
South Africa, in general, deeply cares about its fossil record, and I think that is that is worth mention. It's worth
Yeah.
fight for. I
Yeah,
think.
absolutely. And so the best, so obviously we know one of the best universities to study with is Wits University for paleontology. And elsewhere in the world, where would you recommend?
Elsewhere in the world, myself, I come from a rather regular university. It's not
Okay.
one of,
Right.
and
So it doesn't have to be any specific part of the world where you have to go. You can choose undergraduate courses in paleontology.
no, as I said, what's gonna determine your future in paleontology is really how much stubborn you are, rather
Hmm.
than anything else.
Yeah.
Uh, you're gonna meet adversity. You're gonna meet probably a few disappointments in the way, and
Yeah.
most careers do not survive those in the long run. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's
It's really
how
about how
stubborn
much.
and passionate you are that's gonna be the main factor. And
Yeah.
but if I had to point towards one particular university overseas, I think it would be Portsmouth, because as far as I know, but I may be wrong, but as far as I know, it's the only university with an undergrad in paleontology.
I see.
Most university do paleontology in postgrad only, but Portsmouth,
Okay.
they do it in undergrad. So Portsmouth in Britain, in
I
Great Britain.
see. Okay, great. Well, I learned so much, and I'm sure everybody learned a lot from that. And yeah, as you say, determination, and I think the word is grit. If you really want something, you'll get it in the end. And I think that makes the difference, right? So if you really want this, then go for it. Cool.
Yeah, if it's your
Well,
dream, follow it. Go,
yeah.
go for it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And it was really, really interesting chatting to you. And I know the viewers are going to love this. Yeah, please, I always encourage people, leave comments on the videos, and I will reply. And feel free to reply to the comments as well if they ask any particular questions that you would be able to respond to. So thank you so much. And that's all for today. And see you next time.
Thank you. It was
Thanks.
my great
Bye.
pleasure. Cheers.
Thanks.